Elisabeth Hendrickson, and I am here with my friend Rebecca Murphy. Rebecca, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. So I'm Rebecca Murphy. I am the field CTO at Swarmia, which is kind of like a developer relations developer evangelist role, but you're instead working with more senior leaders on how to solve their productivity problems. So Swarmia builds a software engineering intelligence platform that is aimed at helping you manage the entirety of your kind of software development lifecycle and understand where you have bottlenecks and where you can improve.
And Rebecca, you and I have known each other online for a little while, but we bonded at the recent Rand's 10th anniversary thing because
Yeah.
so much of what you have to say about software effectiveness, I think, is just, I resonate with it so hard. In fact, I have subsequently read your book, which you brought to the event, and
Yeah.
you can see that I have annotated it. I took copious notes while I was reading it. I love your
Aww,
book.
thank you so much.
So I was so looking forward to this conversation and talking about software delivery effectiveness because just there's so much here. One of the things I love about your book is that you are very clear about it's context dependent. Everything is a trade-off. There is no one size fits all. And I wonder if you could just unpack that a little bit more for us here.
Yeah, absolutely. We have so many customer conversations with customers or potential customers or just like colleagues in the industry, and everybody's asking, how do I? Well, everybody was asking, how do I measure the productivity of my software engineers? Now everybody's asking, how do I measure the productivity of this AI thing that I paid for? Not that they still care about the productivity of their engineers as well, but people they want a number, and I've lived it. I've been the person who had to provide that number. And that one number, it is impossible for that one number to convey all of the context that's actually 2 and 3 and 5 layers below that number. So, in the book, we talk about this idea of like size, age, and culture are really it's once I know those three things, it's very easy for me to predict where you might be in your productivity journey and what remedies might be correct. But until I know those three things, all I can do is like, here, read this book. It's good, promise. And so yeah, like context really, when people are coming to ask like, what do I tell my board? My board wants to know how effective we are as an engineering organization. And they don't want to hear about pull requests. They don't want to hear about lines of they don't want to hear about any of the things that we typically measure and pay attention to in an engineering organization. And so I think that is this ever-present challenge that we have, is that senior leadership is often lacking any of the context they need to understand the complexity of the space. It kind of starts from having to educate those very, very senior leaders about what they can and can't want. And that was a big part of the goal of the book, and a big part of what I continue to try and do is explain to those senior leaders that, like you said, there are trade-offs, and we can't. There are 24 hours in a day, and there are constraints around how fast things get done, and very often those constraints don't have anything to do with how fast your developers are typing, right? Which is what Gen AI kind of optimizes for, is you're typing too slow. And you're making too many, and it's not even optimizing for you're making too many mistakes, because so is it, right? So it's really optimizing for you're typing too slow in the case that most people are talking about that they want to measure, right? And I'm sure we'll talk about that part later on, but I think those are two great examples of things that people they just want a number for what is this doing, and they are completely blind to the actual bottlenecks. Which, like I said, it's not how fast you're typing, it's how many times you're getting interrupted, it's how many times your priorities are changing, it's how many times you aren't being allowed to finish what you started and have to pick up something else, or just have 3 things in progress all at the same time. Those tend to be where the bottlenecks are, and those are they're leadership and culture challenges, not individual challenges.
Totally. And actually, I mean, as long as we're here, we might as well dig into that a little bit more. When you said, I'm sure we'll get to this later, what are you hoping we're going to get to? Because this is, for me, this is like the essence of the discussion around engineering effectiveness. So what do you wish people knew?
I have two current, hot takes. um, and I am happy to share them. On the AI front, I think that most naive applications of AI to the software development lifecycle are at best likely to improve experience, but are likely to be net neutral in the velocity quality trade-off. If there was a velocity trade-off, quality trade-off, that it's likely to be pretty neutral. What it may do, in fact, is create larger pull requests that take longer to review, and it creates those pull requests so fast that you don't have enough review capacity on your team, and so pull request reviews start to get backed up. So I think that the naive application of AI to help me type faster, and I understand that's a vast oversimplification of what Claude Code and Cursor and stuff are doing, but still, like, at the end of the day,
that's what, yeah, I think that's what some people are thinking that this is going to do. My developers are too slow, or I want to be able to not hire as many developers or whatever. Right. And so they're thinking that they're going to get more coding capacity out without looking at the entire system and thinking about the bottlenecks. Exactly. And that's what I love that you're pointing out.
Exactly. I think that that's also the challenge when people are coming to us and saying, how do we measure it? And I said, well, what problem were you trying to solve? Did you solve it? And, sometimes they don't let me talk to the customers because if I'm feeling too snarky that day, but genuinely, like, that's how you measure this impact of something, is that you applied it to solve a problem that you had, and now that problem is gone or it's not. And everybody raced to AI for this, and I know of companies that are mandating every pull request must have AI involvement, for real.
I'm sorry. That is what I want to come back to. Because
we can come back to that. Because there's this belief that it is so additive, but again, it's not necessarily writing code faster that you can only release 3 times a month. You haven't solved your bottleneck. And it's I guess Amdahl's law kind of applies here, that, like, if you're trying to improve a process, don't improve the fastest part. Start with the slowest part. And truly, in general, writing the code is especially if you're following other good practices like keeping your pull requests short, and small and legible and reviewable. Writing the code, it's I don't want to take away from the intelligence that it requires, but it's very rarely the bottleneck in a software engineering organization. And so, on the other hand, I was talking to VP of engineering just yesterday and saying, like, I wish with all of my heart that these tools had been this mature when we did a 4 million line migration from Flow to TypeScript, right? And that migration unlocked productivity. But it was a very tedious, try. I think if these tools had been available then, we could have done that much more successfully. And so I'm not poo-pooing AI, but I think that's the thing, is you target it at the actual problems you have, and understanding what the actual problems you have requires talking to your software engineers and understanding what's slowing them down.
Yeah, you're reminding me of a migration that I saw in flight, that was in flight for years, from Angular to React.
Same.
And in general, like, the approach that this group was taking is one that in general I am a fan of, which is incremental. The problem, though, is when you're going from Angular to React, now you have 2 shadow DOMs and you have to keep them in sync. Yeah. And it was an absolute nightmare. And it was a bug nest. It was, they just kept spawning from there.
Right.
And so if the tools had been more mature, or existed, because they didn't exist yet at that point. But I mean, I think that it would have turned what was years of work into something that was fairly straightforward and could have been done, as you said.
Yeah.
But this brings us to one of the things that you and I kind of bonded on, which is the idea of investment. And whether it's we know we want to improve, or whether it's we've got a shiny new tool, how do you think about how you're going to apply that, or how you're going to approach the problem space, because you're making an investment? So how you just described, hey, typing's not the problem, but migrations might be a good application of this thing. How do you think about and reason about making an investment?
I think when we started working on the book, there was great debate about what the first non-introductory chapter would be. Because it's about 3 pillars, right? And the 3 pillars we do consider to be like equal-ish. But the very strong conclusion that we came to is that business outcomes belonged at the front of the book, because without business outcomes, none of the rest of this matters. We shouldn't be making systems faster because it makes us feel good. It's like if you have an API that takes 30 seconds to return, making it, render faster in the browser is maybe not where you want to be spending your time. So I think deciding to invest has to be connected to some kind of business problem that you actually have. Now, there are some business problems that I can assume that you have. I can assume that if you have more than 100 developers, then you probably have the business problem that you need a platform team to have that group of developers be as efficient as possible. How much of an investment? That's an interesting question. And we can, like some companies, that is a double-digit percentage investment of the engineering organization. Sometimes a significant double-digit percentage investment in the engineering organization is in productivity, and people working solely on productivity and platform work. So there are some business problems that, again, tell me your size, age, and culture. And I can make some pretty good guesses about, and whether you have a monorego or not, and a couple other questions. And I can make some pretty good guesses about the kinds of problems that you're going to have. But really, truly, the answer is, if you have already decided, I want to do something about developer productivity, then the first step is to talk to your developers and find out what's making it hard. Because the work of developer productivity is to figure out what's hard and make it go away. The end. Over and over and over again. Right? That's it. Make hard things go away. And so that you get down to the essence where the only thing that's hard is the task itself. And if the task itself isn't hard, well, we can get rid of that too. But we should only be doing work that is legitimately hard and unique. That is the optimal view of an engineering organization, is that we are only working on work that is unique to our business problem and actually requires our expertise to solve. We shouldn't be trying to figure out how to redeploy the Kubernetes clusters, right? Is that even a thing? I don't know. Kubernetes cloud. Whatever.
I'm sorry. I worked on placed the Kubernetes clusters for you. I worked on that product. And so, yes, and our biggest competition was not other cloud providers. Our biggest competition was the DIY, and the platform teams that just loved and had fallen in love with their own DIY solution.
Right.
Oof. Yeah. I mean, I do recognize that this is one of those things where the industry does move, and what was once a unique thing that nobody else could do for you, but you really need, then becomes commodity.
Right. But I worked somewhere that invested heavily in Mesos right as Kate's was coming out, right? And win some, lose some. So yeah, I think that if it's a foregone conclusion for you that you're already going to invest in this somehow, then the first thing to do is to talk to your engineers. Swarmia, I will say, we have a survey component of the product that has well-researched questions to ask your engineers to try and surface any challenges that they're running into. And we can talk a lot about how to talk to your engineers and get information from them, because there's also some more passive ways to be doing that too. But like that's the once you have decided to invest, that's where you start. And then I read an article about this. It's I didn't intend to name a framework anything, but it's we label it the brains framework, and it's in the book. Which is sort of like baseline, like figure out where you are today, research what your problems are. And the next really important thing is to act, to do something about what you hear. And then invest, and not just invest in a platform team, but let teams know that, you should be spending 10% of your capacity on improving your own productivity, whatever that looks like. So that investment part, like, it's okay for you to first fix like 5 bugs based on the survey and then see you, but to really developer productivity is never done. You can't, like, as long as you're continuing to add code to your code base, developer productivity is never done. And even more so if you are also adding people or changing people. So yeah, I think now, if you haven't decided to invest in this yet, if you're trying to decide whether to invest in this yet, we look at benchmarks for like high performing companies in this space. Like, are you shipping code whenever you feel like it, including on a Friday afternoon? If not, then you have a productivity problem, right? And so there's a bunch
that
of
is so interesting, because so many organizations would classify that under the heading of risk. Like, we don't on Fridays because risk, but you're classifying that as it is a productivity problem if you can't ship on a Friday. Say more about that. Why is it about productivity as opposed to risk?
Yeah, it is the reason that the choice is made to not deploy on Friday is about perceived risk. But the question is, what's different on Friday? Like, was it less risky yesterday? Are we willing to break code on Thursdays but not Friday? Like why shouldn't every deploy be good and we have high confidence in it? If it's not, then, or if like maybe we don't want to do it because we know that rollbacks take like 6 hours, we'll fix that maybe, right? Like, if you, and Brian Finster is, I think he would not disagree with me using the word militant about this topic on LinkedIn, and certainly has extensive explanations of why. But that's my brief take on it, is that, if you are afraid to ship on Fridays, then like that is a smell that you have, there's some risk in your system that you aren't handling automatically, and therefore you are underinvested in handling risk automatically, period. Now, I did talk to a guy at a trading company of some sort, and he was like, basically there was a time during the week, I forget when, if it was like 9:30 Monday morning or what, but there was a time during the week where, like, if anything was wrong, billions of dollars, right? And so they did have, like, at some point it's acceptable to say, you know what, we don't need to deploy today, so we're not going to. That's different from saying we're not going to deploy today because we don't trust our systems.
Totally. If you're a retailer, Black Friday is not the day that you decide
it's not
to
the day, yes. Right?
or
And,
Cyber Monday, or yeah.
And when I was at Stripe, absolutely not. Absolutely, we had massive code freezes, and we can debate like code freezes and stuff, but like the money on the line was so massive, and the reputational risk was so massive. And we had enough risk just with this, like the scale alone created, like the scale change created enough drama that we didn't need bugs as well. So at the same time, Stripe, as far as I know, has never had manual QA, and they ship thousands of pull requests a week, straight to production. And so Stripe, in Stripe's case, yes, it is a risk decision because the dollars are just so big. Unless the dollars are so big, if this is about, we don't want to wake people up on a Saturday, well, why are you okay waking them up on a Friday morning, early on Friday morning? Like, neither of those are okay.
So I feel like you're pulling together a whole bunch of things that are you're putting them together all on the same shelf and in a way that I think is super powerful, because what I'm hearing you say is that ultimately risk and productivity are intertwined. You cannot separate one from the other, which I think is such a powerful insight. Because so often in traditional software organizations, they try to manage risk by preventing change. And part of what Agile brought to the conversation was no. You prevent risk by making it easier to
Easy to
change. And
change.
you're
Exactly.
tying that together with productivity.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other thing that you have alluded to, but I want to highlight from your book, which is the balance framework.
Mm-hmm.
I've encountered variations on this, but I've not ever gone back to the original source, which according to y'all is Matt Eccleston, Dropbox, VP Engineering 2020.
Yes.
But what I'm hearing you say about this balance framework is KTLO is the keep the lights on stuff, but then there's also the productivity investments and the improving things investments. Mm-hmm. And what I think I heard you just say, and I want to get confirmation this is what you actually said, if you're not investing and you're not thinking about investing, that's a pretty good signal that you should be, because you're probably under investing.
Yes.
And this is all tied to productivity and risk. And so if you're under investing in this, in the productivity side of things, you're gonna pay for it in the KTLO costs, is right. What I'm hearing you say.
Absolutely. And I think it's like, absolutely. And I think this is intertwined. And I think that think about how we used to ship software. I confess I did not ever ship software this way, but I consumed software shipped in a box.
I've shipped boxes, literal boxes.
Okay. But like, yeah, like I was around when you went to the store and you bought the software off the shelf. And then there was maybe some floppy disks or maybe eventually a CD. And like today, maybe you're writing code for a rocket that's going to go into space. Like, okay, also shrink wrap. Like, we're going to different quality considerations, let's say. We're shipping software to the cloud, and we should make it so that like we don't have to prevent risk by locking down deployments and locking down the ability to release things. We decrease risk by making it easy to change things. And when it's easy to change things, lots of other good things happen too. But that is kind of the fundamental concept behind all things productivity. And the DORA metrics are a great specific example. That in the shrink wrap world, it was very easy to think that like speed versus quality, like it was just, those were trade-off. That was a trade-off you had to make. And depending on what you were shipping, you might choose quality over speed. You might only release once a year, right? And you didn't really have a great way to ship patches, except maybe another floppy disk. Like, I don't know. And so in those days, there was a real trade-off between velocity and quality. And I think that we brought that mentality to cloud-based development, and it is, our instinct there is completely upside down. Basically, the more work you do to improve quality in an automated way, the more velocity you will have, and the more quality you will have. And that test that you write today, you can run it 100 times tomorrow, 1,000 times tomorrow. But that QA engineer who ran that manual test today can at best run it 2 or 3 or 5 times tomorrow. And then 2 or 3 or 5 times the next day. And so the velocity that you gain in the automated validation of code does improve your quality, but it also like it makes so many problems go away. You tie that in with continuous integration, continuous deployment, and well-tested code. And now there's when at Stripe, when you click merge, see ya. Like, bye.
See you on the flip side.
Yeah, so there's nothing else to do once you click merge. And that is certainly not the reality in plenty of places. But that if that was your reality, and you don't have to be Stripe for this to be your reality. I want to make that really clear. Like, Swarming started in 2021, and this is totally, or 2020. I'm sorry, and like this is absolutely our reality, and we don't have an army of software engineers. But yeah, investing in that automation will improve your quality and improve your velocity. And that's really counterintuitive for a lot of people.
It is. And one of the things that you're highlighting, so way back in the day when we shipped literal boxes, I was team lead for a test automation initiative back when the tools were not open source. There were no open source tools. You either rolled your own, which was, oh my goodness, no. Or you bought one of the super expensive heavyweight ones where the licenses were so expensive, they would only buy like enough licenses so that each of the official automation engineers, not even everybody in QA, like there were 3 of us on this automation team. So we had 3 licenses, which meant nobody else could run these things because the only way to run them was with the full desktop license. I am talking about the ancient ages of like 1997. So this is forever ago. But at that time, the discussion about ROI and test automation was on justifying the ROI of this initiative in terms of QA cost savings. And what I'm hearing you talk about is no. The right intuition is more about the productivity improvements. So now it comes back to how many cycles do you get? How many turns the crank? Because that is going to give you that it helps you accelerate. And that is a fundamentally different way of looking at it than I think a lot of organizations have historically looked at it.
Yeah. I mean, there are still absolutely, talked to one last week, there are still absolutely large organizations that you have heard of that have completely independent QA teams. The developers aren't involved, they, load it and look at it or whatever and see, and they demo it and stuff. So, but they aren't involved in quality assurance of their code. And like I said, big company, you've definitely heard of it. And I've worked in those companies too, luckily not recently, but I've worked in those companies too. And that is just, it's a model. And this came up in the context of, I know some of these conversations can be fraught because the QA people might feel that like their jobs are at risk, and they probably are. And the person I was talking to said, oh, well, they're contractors. We don't have to worry about that so much. And so it's not just a separate QA team, but a contractor team. And surprise, surprise, that happens to be their biggest bottleneck in developing software, is moving it through the QA and UAT process.
I wonder how many of these organizations that still treat QA as that separate. I wonder how many of them view it as a cost center.
I think that they cannot fathom that you could assure the quality of software without a person using their eyes to look at it. The company is in a highly regulated space, and so then there's a contingent of people who are like, this, like, we couldn't, like, what? We couldn't get rid of that 30-day process. What are you talking about?
But at the same time, they're trying to minimize the cost. They're treating it as a cost center.
Yeah, yes.
And that's what really kills me. It's like, because I have long rants and could go on discussions about what a human can bring to discussion about quality within a company. But none of that matters as long as they're treating QA as we're getting quality by inspection, which we know doesn't work, number one. And number two, we're going to treat it as a cost center. So we're going to try to minimize cost, which means we're going to have an RFP to get a contract agency and go with the cheaper provider. And none of that is going to lead to holistic improvement.
Yeah. I think you see this especially among companies that maybe aren't tech-led isn't really the right word, but the thing they are selling is not technology. There are plenty, and I had to be reminded of this coming from like cool product companies. I had to be reminded that like plenty of people are doing software development not at cool product companies. And no, not to, diss but like not everybody is even knows that these are best practices. And so I can very much imagine the thinking that led to this arrangement, because if a company is not, engineering isn't at its core, these suddenly sound like very rational decisions to a non-technical leader.
I do think it varies. So I will give credit to Paul Gaffney, who is no longer with Home Depot, and I'm sorry, Paul, I don't actually remember where you are right now, but he brought a lot of this mindset to Home Depot, and there are other organizations that are technology enabled and that fully embraced the idea that technology was going to be their superpower and accelerating was critical for their success. And so I know they exist.
Yeah. Walmart is another fantastic example. Like, so much innovation goes on in Walmart tech. So yes, and you could even say Amazon is a tech-enabled e-commerce site.
Well, they're complicated. They are just, let's not go there.
Yeah. But yeah, you're entirely correct. This isn't like pathologically true about these companies. Some of the companies have realized that like we can't keep working like this, and that's kind of the transformation that this company is going through right now, is we can't keep working like this. But yeah, I do think it just highlights, like we started talking about, this connection between velocity and quality, and that it's our naive intuition about it is provably incorrect.
Yeah.
But convincing people who only know how to inspect things with their eyes that we can stop inspecting things with our eyes is a challenge.
Or that we could change the way that we inspect things with our eyes. Because I will honor that there is probably some valid concern somewhere in there, but being a regulated industry isn't that
isn't itself
not right by itself. Because if you're in a regulated, I would think that the auditors would much prefer to see something that is 100% reliably reproducible. And so I feel like the message here, though, is for any organization that maybe only got partway through their digital transformation or got stuck at the place where they were doing quality by inspection, that there's hope. So at Pivotal, we talked a lot about hope and fear, and we wanted to provide hope and not drive through fear. But I will say that anybody who is not afraid a little bit of what will become true in the age of AI, maybe ought to be, because AI is capable of generating all kinds of stuff. And if we're trying to inspect quality in, and now we have just optimized the productivity of the typing part,
right,
what's going to happen to those cycle times?
Yes. Objectively and soon observably bad things are going to happen. And even in the 2024 DORA report, we already saw that net typing, the make me type faster, is not having a notable impact. Some numbers go up a little, some numbers go down a little. It's having a very big impact on documentation and accessibility of documentation, because documentation is getting written that never would have been before. And that documentation is more findable through tools like Glean. Yeah, your intuition is exactly right, and we're starting to see evidence of it. And we also see evidence that when GitHub talks about the productivity gains from Copilot, they talk about lines of code. We stopped talking about productivity in terms of lines of code a long time ago. It's not a valid metric. People are also looking at what percent of lines were accepted, which is kind of a half step away from counting lines of code, I think, because that's a statement about your engineer as much as a statement about your tool. I could reject a line that you could accept, and we could both be equally correct. Like, we could both end up with a correct pull request, whether AI wrote it or not. So I think, we're going to see the typical, and I've run into it too. When even just when I'm playing, I'm playing with Claude Code, and suddenly I've written 2,000 lines of code and haven't made a commit. Right? So I think that that's a very natural thing to happen unless you're really diligent about it. And
Mm-hmm.
tools like Swarmia help you be diligent about it, because they you can set goals for how big you want your pull request to be, and we will shake our finger at you if you miss that goal too much. So, but you have to be even more conscious of the size of pull requests than you had to be before, and like we talked about at the top, that's just going to stack up your review queue, and it's also going to, if God help you, you don't have CI/CD, like push merge and forget about it. You're creating so many more problems for yourself than you're solving by typing faster. So I think it all goes back to this, like you have to do the work of identifying what the actual bottlenecks are. And that
Mm-hmm.
brings me to my second hot take, which we never got to.
Woo! Well, then it's high time. Second
High
hot
time.
take.
Second hot take is that leadership and culture are two of the most dominant factors in productivity.
Yes.
And you can't tell a team to stop having so many cross-team dependencies, right? Like, that's an organizational problem that leadership has created. That's not a problem
Mm-hmm.
that the team can solve. You can't tell the team to limit their work in progress and then at the other side of your mouth, ask them to just sneak this thing in for you that the customer really wants, right? Like, so a culture that allows interruptions and allows multiple requires multiple things to be in progress and doesn't have clear priorities that the team can identify how they relate to, in the absence of all of those things, you're going to have productivity issues no matter how good your software engineers are. And I think that it goes back to the CEO who doesn't understand how automated testing works. There's a part of me that says, well, that's actually kind of your job. No, I'm sorry. Like, this is probably the place that you are spending the single most money in your organization, is on your engineering and your infrastructure. It's time for you to care about how this works. This is not optional anymore. Either care or listen to the experts and back away. And I think that instead you see a lot of senior leadership in a fear mode right now and looking to try to prove that they're doing a good job to whoever they are accountable to. And so there's not maybe the willingness that there used to be to say, hey, CEO, that's a dumb question, because you can't go get another job tomorrow. Right? So I think that I don't, not that it was ever easy to say that to your CEO, but I think that there's a lot of people right now trying to prove that they're doing a good job, and they are afraid to ask their leadership to learn enough to have these conversations.
Yeah, and I also feel like so many of the things that we measure are vanity metrics that, or historically, I'll say,
Mm-hmm.
have measured are vanity, like lines of code is a vanity metric.
Mm-hmm.
It
Right.
doesn't drive the business outcomes. It's easy to measure, and it feels good to be able to say, oh, well, the average developer can only produce 14 lines of code a day or
Right.
whatever. I mean, that's actually a number from 1988 or something. It's forever ago. But well, I can produce, it's a vanity
200.
metric.
Right. Right.
And those kinds of metrics, if some in the hands of a very senior leader who didn't come up through engineering, doesn't
Mm-hmm.
understand how software gets delivered, only understands that whether or not they're getting features out the other end, but wants to latch onto something that is easier to measure, I do think that we end up in vanity metric land a little bit too easily, because it is actually hard to measure business outcomes.
Yeah. I think we like vanity metrics. Yes, absolutely. I think we also end up with metrics that we want to be leading indicators, but are instead lagging indicators, or that we want to be super real time to tell us exactly how productive we were this week. And that is not an answerable question. So there are, like, we can tell you what we shipped this week. Was that good? Are you happy with it? Did it actually achieve the goals that you had? And so, but yeah, so I've also been somewhere where they really wanted to know, like, PRs per dev per day, every 2 weeks or something like that. PRs per dev per day, which my heart has softened around this metric a little bit. I do think it is an excellent, deeply lagging metric of the overall kind of over time. This number should stay steady or go up. And if it's not, that's a great sign that you're underinvested in productivity for some definition of it, right? It doesn't mean we need to buy everybody faster computers, or maybe it does, right? Like,
maybe it
I don't know. Like all of these numbers are just they're thermometers. They tell you if you have a fever. The end.
Yep.
They don't tell you how you're going to feel the next day. So, but I do think that still we have thermometers. I've got one in my bathroom, right? Like, it's good to have crude early warning systems that like something's starting to go bad. And so I talk about this lagging metric, meaning that we can't like watch it every day. But if we see over 3 quarters that this number has decreased by, 20%, something's really wrong, and we should worry about that. So yeah, my heart has softened on that metric when it is used correctly, which I have heard of. I have been told that it can happen.
So let's come back to that. How do you talk to developers question? Because one of the things that, and I say this as somebody who grew up in engineering, and I know my own biases, and I know that I am more aware of them today than I was, say, 20 years ago. But I think that I was certainly an unreliable narrator 20 years ago. I would like to think I'm more reliable now because I am more self-aware of why I form opinions of a particular type, whatever those opinions are. But when I think about the whole Angular to React migration that I mentioned, it wasn't to drive business results. It was because the justification was nobody codes in Angular anymore. It will be really hard to hire developers. And the cost to the business was massive. The benefit to the business was incredibly low. But if you did an interview with the developers, they would have all told you the biggest problem we have is that we're having to slog through this ancient Angular code. So how do you talk to developers to get at that? What is actually the bottleneck question?
Yeah. So the React Angular one is interesting because like JavaScript went through a bit of a bad time there.
Oh, it did. To be fair, it did.
Yeah. And so, and you were left in this, even if, and same with the flow to TypeScript, same thing exactly. Like we could have at Stripe told people, yes, you actually just suck it up, keep working through it. The reality was that in this mono repo, we had dozens of different versions of Flow. The Facebook had like publicly disowned the open source aspect of the project. There was no community around it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And it was becoming especially at a time when retaining high quality front end engineers was hard, it was becoming a pain point. I do think that in the last 5 years, we don't have, of course, they're still out there, but like we're moving away rapidly from the React engineer or the Angular engineer, and moving to, especially with the emergence of Node. I shouldn't say emergence, that was 16 years ago now, but it has become like a first-class runtime over the 16 years. And so you start to have full stack developers who are familiar with writing JavaScript, and it makes less sense to have a React developer. And it also makes less sense to have a front end team and a back end team, because that was always an anti-pattern that introduced high cross team collaboration costs. So I think people have realized that. Anyway, that's just, I grew up in front end land, so I have like very specific opinions about and like very specific historical recollections. I would have been one of those people arguing for the migration to React. And because there definitely became a time where it was clear that Angular wasn't going to be it. And there was a lot more energy, community energy and et cetera, behind React, relatively speaking. And Stripe still had backbone code in its code base when I was there. So like, their React now, but had still had some stuff lying around, but had managed to segregate it sufficiently. I think that we made the React to TypeScript decision for a number of Flow to TypeScript decision for a number of reasons. Developer experience was definitely one of them. Tooling consistency and being able, like, we had a mono repo with 20 different versions of Flow. That's not a mono repo, right? Like, so we had much less leverage in that space than we had for other programming languages. And we came up with a plan where we thought that we could do it in about 6 months without disrupting anything. And that's what we did. And we had a team that was literally the JavaScript infrastructure team. Like, this was literally the stuff that they expected us to be doing. So I defend that migration to the end of the earth, and I think it was a good investment because it was isolated and and like, we ended up doing it in Big Bang. Big Bang one Saturday. We had been working on it for 6 months, several people working on it. And one day we did it, and then it was done. And so if you can do that, that might be a really, like, if you could make that Angular to React cutover in 6 months with no impact to live development, sure. Sign me up. But I think, like, everything has to go, like, what is, and this again is something that's changed a lot in the last 5 years. We're asking developers a lot more than we used to be. Why does this matter to the business? And asking developers to have some accountability around answering that question. Not universally. I think the industry has a long way to go around that, but there was certainly a time in the industry where it was like, you're the team that's building the resumes product. Was the resumes product a good idea? Well, I don't know. You're the team that's building the resumes product because we think we should have one. It wasn't that bad, but, like, that's an exaggeration. But yeah, there was a time when, like, you were very connected just to what you were working on and didn't necessarily have to have a bigger picture view of whether that was good or correct. I think, again, especially with the emergence of AI, developers have to spend less time on certain aspects of their job. We're asking them to spend more time on that kind of product thinking and thinking about the value to the business. But I think that's what it comes down to, is like, what is the value to the business? We could articulate. We had a lot of evidence. There were a lot of technical reasons. There were a lot of, like, when this is done, we will be able to, statements that we could make. And we were able.
That is the most powerful statement that you can make. When this is done, we will be able to. Like, I want to frame that and put it behind my head.
Yes. And if it's, we will be able to retain developers, well, it's not really a problem right now. Like, I find plenty of people who would be happy to work on your Angular code base if it was a job, especially people who did grow up as just front-end developers are in a bit of a pinch right now. So yeah, what will this enable? That's the short answer to everything I just said, is what will this enable? And if you can't answer that, or you can't put some sort of, maybe not literally a price tag, but some sort of reason that the business should value that. In our case, it was very easy. It was easy to say, like, all the things that I said, and say, like, the Ruby team has all this leverage. We don't. We need to fix that, right? So that was very easy to make that case. I'm very sympathetic to the React and Angular thing because they are dramatically different. That would be like, we're going to migrate to JavaScript from Java.
I mean, it's certainly possible that it was the right business decision. I wasn't there when the business decision got made. So but I do look at it as an example of a thing where it was really a discussion about taste, the decision to start the migration to begin with.
Yeah.
And I'm not sure how deep a discussion ever got had about, when this is done, we will be able to. So that then we can talk about the business outcomes and the trade-offs.
Right. And again, it's there may have been a very good case for doing this. Knowing nothing is a tough call. Like, the answer isn't clear whether to do it or not, but my hunch is probably not. Unless there's something that does make it possible. If it's like, oh, we'll have access to all of this new capabilities or whatever, sure, like, maybe. Or if it's like Google has announced that Angular is being deprecated next week, well, that's interesting too, right? But if there's no kind of forcing factor, yeah, it's a hard one.
Okay, so we're getting close to time. Let's do one quick prognostication, if I can pronounce that word, because we started by talking about AI, measuring the impact of AI. So it's a year from now, and how are organizations actually measuring the impact of AI on their effectiveness? And out of curiosity, do you have a take on what they're seeing?
I think that I don't. This is 12 months. You said.
If you're happier doing 24 months, I'll take any time frame, but I'm looking for a forward looking
Yeah.
crystal ball moment.
My crystal ball moment is that in 12 months, I don't think we have like put a bow on the measurement question, because I think that people, it's part of the putting a bow on the measurement question is helping people realize they're asking the wrong questions and they're doing it for the wrong reasons. I think that will, I think the reason that everybody wants to measure this, and we're getting customers coming back from the dead when we send out something about measuring AI productivity, and they're like, "Ooh, sign me up." I think it's because there's a suspicion it's not working. Like, the world hasn't changed as much as from the board's view. The world hasn't changed as much as they were expecting it to by spending this money. And that is because they spent the money before they understood the problem they were trying to solve or articulated the problem they were trying to solve. And so now, people who spent money with no outcome, and they're surprised. But they didn't like document the desired outcome in the beginning. I mean, the desired outcome was go faster. Well, you're not. I think that you will continue to see people using AI in two really interesting ways. And people who keep using CodeGen will just accept that, like, it's a nice facilitator, I guess. And we'll become more aware of the challenges of using CodeGen and the dangers of it, and we'll put guardrails in place around those things. But I think the much more interesting thing for me, and not entirely in a positive way, is where you start to, well, two things that are interesting to me. One is where you start to see people who don't have the software engineer title writing code. Maybe it's not production code. Maybe it's just prototyping code. Maybe it's just something to show to a customer and see what the customer says. And the customer says, that's stupid, I don't want it. And now you never spent an engineer on building it. And you never spent an engineer on getting that information. Same with UX roles. Same with lots of, like, you're going to have people building their own dashboards and stuff using AI. If the enablement is there in the company. And there's all sorts of double-edged swords in everything I just said. But in the most optimistic view, that's where the productivity change comes from, is from these non-engineer people being able to do things that used to require an engineer. This doesn't make the engineers suddenly unemployed. It just takes stuff off their backlog that they were never going to get to anyway. We saw this indeed where we had if you wanted to run an experiment on, like, just changing the language of a button, or changing the text of a button in a specific language, we had country managers who very much wanted to do that. And if the country was Finland, no engineer was going to spend their time on that. You were never going to get engineering time to do that. So we built a tool so that the country managers could just do it themselves. And, like, we removed engineers from the process entirely. So I think that's where you're going to start to see a lot more interesting AI stuff. So you've got these new humans that are using it. But I think we're also going to see in DevOps, you're going to see so much more DevOps stuff. I've been playing with, like, a tool to tell me what the riskiest files are in this code base, what should we be especially afraid of touching, and what should we do about it. Now, I haven't read the code, so I don't know how good it is, but I got an answer to that. And, like, I can start to see people, like, building tools on top of those sorts of things. So AI becomes more about a quality assistant than a coding assistant, and a facilitation, a tool for facilitating smart decision making, air quotes, a tool for facilitating decision making through that DevOps process. So that's my take. The measurement thing, I think we still have to. There's a reckoning coming that it's not. It is making people type faster, and it doesn't matter. I think that reckoning is coming in the next 12 months. And I don't know if we will figure out how to measure it before it does, if that makes sense. Like, I think that the reckoning could come even without numbers in the not too distant future.
Going to be fascinating. I am so
Indeed.
grateful to you for your time. Thank you
This is
so
a treat.
much.
This is a treat. You talk about everything that's on my mind this week, so excellent.
Mine too.
We did great.